The air inside Dr. Aris Thorne's bioengineering lab hung thick and heavy, a noxious cocktail of burnt electronics, ozone, and something acridly organic. It clung to the back of my throat, a taste of metallic decay even through the respirator. The scene was a maelstrom of shattered glass, buckled steel, and twisted wiring, bathed in the sickly green glow of emergency lights that flickered with an unreliable pulse. This wasn't just a lab. It was a fortress, a high-security vault of scientific ambition, now ripped open and bleeding its secrets onto the sterile floor. Reid, glad I here. The lead detective, a man whose permanent frown seemed etched deeper than usual today, gestured vaguely at the devastation. Looks like a hell of an accident, or maybe a suicide. The security logs are a mess, but Thorne was the only one in here when it went off. I nodded, my eyes already sweeping the room, ignoring the detective's summary. His job was to get the big picture. Mine was to decipher the microscopic brushstrokes. Thorne's work was legendary, whispered about in hushed tones across scientific journals and corporate boardrooms. Groundbreaking, they called it, potentially world-changing. Now it was just a smoking ruin, a testament to power unleashed. The sheer scale of the destruction was overwhelming. A central workstation, presumably where Thorne had been, was reduced to slag, a grotesque sculpture of molten metal and carbonized plastic. Nearby, a row of bioreactors, usually pristine and humming with life, lay ruptured, their contents spilled across the floor in glistening, viscous pools. I could identify the distinct smell of growth media, now mixed with something far more sinister. "Bodies over there," the detective mumbled, pointing with a gloved hand towards a section of the lab less directly impacted by the primary blast, but still scorched. I approached slowly, my boots crunching on broken shards of tempered glass and ceramic tiles. Dr. Thorne lay sprawled, a crumpled figure against a scorched wall. His lab coat, or what was left of it, was fused to his skin in places, blackened and brittle. The force of the explosion had thrown him, but it hadn't dismembered him, which was an interesting detail. Most of the damage seemed to be from the flash heat and concussive wave. His face, though contorted in a silent scream, was surprisingly intact, a grim mask of final surprise. "Any preliminary assessment on the cause?" I asked, my voice muffled by the respirator, my gaze fixed on the victim. "Forensics team thinks it was an uncontrolled exothermic reaction. A colleague, a junior investigator, offered from behind me. Could be a miscalculation with his experimental compounds, or maybe he rigged it. He was under a lot of pressure, apparently." I knelt, my knees protesting the hard floor, and began my closer examination of Thorne. The scene suggested a colossal failure, a high-stakes experiment gone catastrophically wrong. The narrative was clear. Brilliant but reclusive scientist, world-changing research, tragic accident, or desperate suicide. It was a story that almost wrote itself, and that was precisely why I felt a prickle of unease. Simple stories rarely held up under the harsh glare of true scrutiny. I studied the pattern of burns on Thorne's body. They were extensive, consistent with a high-temperature flash, but there was an asymmetry. His left arm, bent at an awkward angle, showed deeper charring on the inner forearm, almost like a localized, intense heat source had been applied there, distinct from the general thermal blast. I leaned closer, pulling a small, specialized magnifier from my kit. The skin around the wrist was severely burned, but just beneath the elbow. On the underside, there was a peculiar, almost geometric pattern of scorching, like a stenciled mark, barely a centimeter across. It wasn't random, not like the splatters and char marks elsewhere. It was too precise, too deliberate. My breath hitched, a silent internal gasp. It was so small, so utterly insignificant amidst the monumental destruction, that anyone else would have dismissed it as just another burn mark, a random consequence of the inferno, but it wasn't. It was too sharp-edged, too uniform. It looked like the outline of a micro-circuit component, or perhaps a highly localized energy discharge point. I ran a gloved finger lightly over the edge of the pattern. The skin there was crisped, but the surrounding tissue was merely reddened, not obliterated. This suggested a very focused, intense heat source, applied before or during the main explosion, but not caused by it. Or if it was caused by it, it implied a very specific point of origin, one that didn't quite fit the narrative of a generalized runaway reaction. My gut tightened. A miscalculation, a suicide, those were broad strokes. This mark, this almost imperceptible detail, was a needlepoint. It whispered of something far more intricate, a precise act within the chaos. Someone hadn't just blown up Thorne's lab. Someone had done something very particular to Dr. Thorne himself, perhaps right before the final, devastating act. And they had been intimately familiar with how to do it and how to hide it. The story wasn't writing itself after all. It was being rewritten, and I was just beginning to find the erasures. The acrid tang of ozone and burnt electronics still clung to my clothes, a phantom reminder of the lab, but the air in the FBI Forensic Science Division examination suite was starkly different. Here, the scent was clinical antiseptic, a cold counterpoint to the chaos I'd just left. Thorne lay on the stainless steel table, stripped of his tattered lab coat, his body now a canvas for the medical examiner's scrutiny. The harsh fluorescent lights above cast no shadows, revealing every nuance of his remains. "Morning, Reid," the medical examiner grunted, not looking up from the digital display showing Thorne's vitals just before death. Her voice was low, accustomed to the quiet reverence of the room. He was already gloved, her movements efficient, almost surgical in their precision, even before the first incision. I nodded, stepping closer, my gaze fixed on Thorne. The initial scene had screamed accident. A colossal, high-energy event, but something about the way he'd fallen, the specific pattern of destruction around him, had felt off, too neat perhaps, or too messy in a calculated way. "Any preliminary thoughts, Doc?" I asked, my voice a low rumble. She paused, her instrument hovering over Thorne's chest. "Initial assessment suggests significant trauma consistent with a high-pressure blast wave. Thermal injuries are present, but localized, not as widespread as I'd expect from a lab-wide explosion of that magnitude." She gestured with a gloved hand towards his torso. "See here, the burns are deepest around his chest and arms, but his lower extremities and back are relatively spared, considering the supposed force." I leaned in, studying the mottled skin, the singed hairs. He was right. If a blast had engulfed him, the thermal damage should have been more uniform, more devastating across his entire body. This was like he'd been shielding himself, or the source of the heat was very specific. "And the cause of death?" I prompted. Oh, I suspected the answer. "Massive internal hemorrhaging, likely from organ rupture due to the concussive force. His heart sustained significant damage, but there's something else," she added, her brow furrowing as she adjusted a magnifying visor. "Look at the fracture patterns on the ribs. They're consistent with the blast, yes, but the displacement. It suggests a direct, focused impact before the full force of the explosion hit. Almost like he was already falling or had been struck at the moment of the blast." My internal alarm bells, already ringing faintly, now clanged with more urgency. Struck, possibly, or just an awkward fall into something solid right as the pressure wave hit. It's not conclusive, but it's an anomaly. She pointed to a faint, almost invisible abrasion on his temple. "And this, a minor contusion, nothing fatal, but it happened before the blast. No thermal damage to the skin around it, indicating it wasn't caused by heat." My mind raced, piecing together these fragments. A localized burn pattern, ribs fractured in a way that suggested a pre-existing impact, a contusion untouched by the heat. This wasn't a simple accident. This was something far more intricate. Thorne hadn't just been standing there when an experiment went awry. He'd been compromised somehow just before the catastrophic event. I circled the table, my eyes scanning every inch of Thorne's body. My gaze drifted to his left hand, specifically his fingernails. Under the harsh lights, something glinted. It was minuscule, almost like a speck of dust, but it caught the light differently. I asked the medical examiner for a pair of tweezers. Carefully, I plucked the tiny shard from beneath his thumbnail. It was no bigger than a grain of sand, irregularly shaped, and had a strange, iridescent sheen. It wasn't metal, not glass, and certainly nothing I recognized from a lab environment. The labs I'd seen were sterile, controlled. This felt organic, yet artificial. "What is that?" the medical examiner asked, peering over my shoulder. I held it up to the light, then placed it gently on a sterile slide. "I have no idea, but I can tell you this much. It doesn't belong in Thorne's lab, not from what I saw." It had a subtle, almost pearlescent quality, unlike any common material. It was too small to be immediately identifiable, but its presence felt significant, a foreign body in a sterile death. I bagged it, labeling it for immediate analysis. This tiny fragment I instinctively knew was a thread leading somewhere important. Later, as I reviewed the initial witness statements in a small conference room down the hall, the pieces of Thorne's life began to fall into place, forming a backdrop to the violence. The lead detective, a no-nonsense woman with tired eyes, laid out the preliminary findings. "We've got two individuals who stand out," she explained, tapping her pen against a printout. "First, a Dr. Silas Vance. He's a rival bioengineer, same university, different department. Apparently, he and Thorne had a rather public and vitriolic disagreement recently over research funding and intellectual property. Thorne was known for his aggressive pursuit of grants and a certain possessiveness over his ideas. I nodded. Thorne's personality, as described by the campus security and the few colleagues I'd spoken to, painted a picture of a brilliant but intensely competitive man. And the second, a former research assistant, a woman named Maya. He was let go by Thorne about 6 months ago. Apparently, it was a messy termination. She accused him of taking credit for her contributions and intellectual theft. She's been rather vocal about her resentment, even threatening legal action. A rival scientist driven by professional jealousy, a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. Both plausible, both with motives that could escalate. Thorne's reclusive nature, his focus on groundbreaking, potentially world-changing research had clearly created enemies. The inconsistencies from the autopsy, the strange trace element, and now these two potential leads. The picture was becoming clearer. Sharper, this wasn't a tragic miscalculation. It was a meticulously planned execution. And I had a feeling that tiny, iridescent shard was going to tell me exactly how it was done, and perhaps by whom. The tension in the air wasn't just the lingering scent of chemicals. It was the quiet hum of a predator finally showing its tracks. A former research assistant. She's been rather vocal about her resentment, even threatening legal action. The cold glow of the monitors in the FBI Forensic Science Division examination suite did little to warm the air. I'd spent the morning sifting through the physical evidence from Thorne's lab, but the real story, I suspected, lay hidden in the ones and zeros of his digital life. The lead from the previous day, the disgruntled former research assistant, still buzzed in the back of my mind, a potential motive, but it didn't explain the meticulous nature of the scene I'd found. This wasn't a crime of passion. It felt like a calculated performance. I settled into the ergonomic chair, the hum of the servers a low thrum against my ears. Before me sat Thorne's primary workstation, a sleek, powerful machine that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi film. The lab's network drives, backed up and mirrored, were also ready for scrutiny. My fingers danced over the keyboard, a familiar rhythm. I began with the network logs, looking for any external access, any unusual traffic in the days leading up to the incident. Nothing immediately jumped out, which in itself was suspicious. Thorne was a recluse, but his research was cutting edge. It should have attracted attention, digital or otherwise. Next, I tackled his encrypted drives. Thorne hadn't made it easy. Layers of proprietary encryption designed to protect intellectual property meant I had to employ some of the division's more advanced decryption tools. It took hours, a painstaking process of brute-forcing algorithms and exploiting known vulnerabilities. The sterile environment of the suite, usually a place of quiet concentration, felt heavy with the unspoken weight of what I might uncover. When the first directory finally cracked open, a cascade of files appeared. Project codenames flashed across the screen. Genesis, Chrysalis, Pandora. The file sizes alone hinted at vast datasets. I opened the most recent one, Project Chimera, and started reading through the research papers, the data logs, the experimental protocols. My eyes widened as I scrolled. Thorne wasn't just dabbling in genetic engineering. He was pioneering advanced genetic sequencing, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. The applications were staggering: targeted disease eradication, enhanced human capabilities, perhaps even a new form of biological warfare. This wasn't just groundbreaking. It was world-altering, capable of unimaginable good or horrifying destruction. The implications of this research falling into the wrong hands sent a shiver down my spine, despite the controlled temperature of the suite. I dug deeper, cross-referencing file creation dates with modification logs. That's when I hit a snag. A cluster of crucial project files, all related to Chimera, showed signs of recent, sophisticated data manipulation. They weren't just deleted. They had been overwritten multiple times, an expert attempt at an irreversible wipe. But even the best digital janitors leave traces. I recovered fragments, metadata crumbs that told a story. The wipe hadn't been entirely successful, and more importantly, it had occurred within the last 48 hours before Thorne's death. The timestamp was precise. This wasn't an accident. This was an intentional act, executed by someone with deep technical knowledge, someone who knew exactly what they were looking for and what they wanted gone. My mind raced. Was Thorne trying to hide something, or was an external party attempting to erase their tracks after stealing or sabotaging his work? The suicide or tragic miscalculation narrative was crumbling fast. I paused, rubbing the bridge of my nose. The digital trail was complex, but it was confirming my gut feeling. I needed to talk to Maya, Thorne's assistant, again. Her initial statements had been brief, shaken. Perhaps now, with the weight of her employer's death settling in, she might offer more. I found her contact in Thorne's digital Rolodex and called her. His voice was hesitant, almost a whisper when he answered. "This is Reid. I'm with the FBI. I need to ask you a few more questions about Dr. Thorne." I don't know what else I can tell you," she stammered, her voice tight with a fear that wasn't just grief. "I understand this is difficult, Maya, but it's important. Did Dr. Thorne ever express concerns about his research or anyone trying to access it? Did you notice anything unusual in his behavior in the days before the incident?" A long silence stretched between us, punctuated only by my own breathing and the distant hum of the server racks. Then she spoke, her voice barely audible. "He was different, very different recently, jumpy, like he thought someone was watching him, even when he was alone in the lab. He started locking the lab door even when he was just stepping out for coffee, something he never did before. And he was always checking his computer, running scans. He kept saying, they're trying to get in, Maya, they're trying to steal everything." "Who, Maya?" "He started taking his work home too, printed copies, physical drives, said it was safer than the network." Her words were a stark echo of the digital ghost I just uncovered. Thorne's paranoia, the sophisticated data wipe, it all clicked into place. Someone was trying to get in. Someone succeeded. And now Thorne was dead. I knew then with absolute certainty that I wasn't looking for an accident victim, but a target. And the killer had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide their tracks. The tension in the FBI Forensic Science Division examination suite was palpable, thick enough to taste like ozone after a lightning strike. The colleague who delivered the news about Thorne's wiped drive had left, her words still echoing in the sterile quiet. Someone was trying to get in. Someone succeeded. And now Thorne was dead. My gut churned with a familiar unease, a sensation that always preceded a deep dive into the kind of meticulous work that either proved or disproved the impossible. I leaned back into the hum of the mass spectrometer, its delicate mechanisms whirring softly. The microscopic trace element, barely visible to the naked eye even on the specialized slide, was now magnified 100,000 times, bathed in a focused beam of light. This wasn't just dust or a random speck. Its structure, its very presence, felt deliberate. My fingers, steady despite the internal pressure, adjusted the focus knob, bringing the intricate lattice of the sample into sharper relief on the monitor. The initial scan had been inconclusive, hinting at organic and inorganic compounds, but nothing definitive. Now I was running a full spectral analysis, pushing the instrument to its limits. I watched the screen, a kaleidoscope of data points and shifting wavelengths. Each peak and trough on the graph represented an element, a specific chemical signature. Most of them were common background noise from the lab environment, but I was looking for an anomaly, a rogue signal that didn't belong. Minutes stretched into an eternity. My eyes, tired from hours of scrutiny, darted across the display, searching. Then a distinct pattern emerged, a series of sharp, unusual spikes clustered together in the higher frequency range. It was unlike anything I'd seen in the standard forensic databases. This wasn't a natural compound. This was synthetic, engineered. I cross-referenced the unique spectral fingerprint against a specialized database, one that cataloged rare polymers and advanced composite materials used in high-tech manufacturing. The system word processing then flashed a match. My breath hitched. The name that appeared on the screen was a mouthful, poly-p-phenylene 2,6-benzobisoxazole, PBO fiber. It was a mouthful, and it was significant. PBO fiber. I knew it. Not from crime scenes, but from academic papers and industry reports. This wasn't something I'd find in a typical lab accident. This was an incredibly strong, heat-resistant, and chemically inert synthetic polymer used in niche, high-end industrial applications, aerospace components, advanced ballistics, specialized protective gear, and crucially in some of the most cutting-edge research equipment. It was expensive, difficult to produce, and almost impossible to acquire without going through very specific channels. My mind raced, connecting the dots. A sophisticated, deliberate act, the data wipe, Thorne's paranoia, and now this trace element, a signature of something highly specialized, something beyond the realm of common lab materials. This wasn't about a disgruntled colleague or a random competitor. This pointed to something bigger, something corporate. I pulled up Thorne's research grant applications, the financial disclosures, anything that linked him to external funding. OmniCorp. The name jumped out at me, bold and undeniable. A multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with its fingers in everything from pharmaceuticals to advanced materials, including, I now recalled, a significant investment in specialized polymers. They had been Thorne's primary corporate sponsor for the last 3 years, funding his proprietary bioengineering initiatives. The initial theory of suicide or accident evaporated, replaced by a much darker, more calculated scenario. Someone connected to OmniCorp, or someone with access to their specialized materials, had been in Thorne's lab, and they had left a calling card, however microscopic. I made the call to the field office, requesting an immediate interview with OmniCorp's liaison to Thorne's project. The detective on the other end sounded surprised. I cut him off, explaining the shift in focus. "This isn't about Thorne's personal life anymore," I stated, my voice firm. "This is about high-stakes corporate espionage. Worse." Less than an hour later, the OmniCorp liaison arrived at the FBI field office, accompanied by a sharp-suited lawyer. I met them in a stark, windowless interview room. The liaison, a man named Mr. Albright, was impeccably dressed, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his smile too wide, too practiced. He looked like he belonged on a corporate annual report cover, not in a room discussing a suspicious death. "Reid," I introduced myself, offering a brief nod. "Thank you for coming in so quickly, Mr. Albright." "Of course, Agent Reid," Albright replied, his voice smooth as polished marble. "OmniCorp is fully committed to assisting in any way we can regarding Dr. Thorne's tragic passing. A brilliant mind, truly, a great loss." He gestured vaguely as if to encompass the entire tragedy. "Indeed," I said, letting the silence hang for a moment, observing him. His eyes, a pale blue, seemed to dart around the room, settling on nothing for too long. "We've uncovered some unusual findings at Dr. Thorne's lab, specifically a trace element that doesn't align with a typical lab environment." Albright's smile didn't waver. "Oh, and what might that be, Agent Reid?" His tone was curious, almost jovial, entirely out of place for the conversation. "A synthetic polymer," I explained, watching for any flicker of recognition. EBO fiber, to be precise. Extremely rare, highly specialized. OmniCorp manufactures it, doesn't it? His lawyer shifted slightly in his chair, a subtle movement that didn't escape my notice. Albright, however, maintained his composure. "OmniCorp has many divisions, Agent Reid. We are a global leader in advanced materials, yes. PBO fiber is indeed one of our proprietary products, used in very specific industrial applications, as you noted." He paused, then added, "But I assure you, Doctor, Thorne's lab would have no reason to possess such a material. His work was biological, not material science." "And yet it was there," I countered, leaning forward slightly. "A microscopic trace consistent with transfer from an external source. Perhaps a contaminant," Albright suggested, his brow furrowing slightly, a performance of concern. "Cross-contamination from another facility, a delivery perhaps." "Unlikely," I stated flatly. "The lab was a high-security environment, meticulously controlled, and the location of the trace was very specific, near the central console, not near a delivery bay." I watched him closely. He was being overly cooperative, offering explanations before I even asked for them, anticipating my questions. It was a classic deflection tactic. "Well then, I'm truly at a loss," Albright said, spreading his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "I can only reiterate OmniCorp's full cooperation. We have no knowledge of any PBO fiber being present in Dr. Thorne's lab, nor any reason for it to be there. And certainly, no one from OmniCorp would have had any reason to interfere with Dr. Thorne or his research." The word interfere hung in the air, carefully chosen. I knew he was lying, or at least withholding. The practiced ease, the ready answers. The unwavering smile, it all screamed calculated evasion. This wasn't a man caught off guard. This was a man performing. The mystery hadn't just deepened, it had become far more dangerous. "Unlikely," I stated flatly. "The lab was a high-security environment, meticulously controlled. He was being overly cooperative, offering explanations before I even asked for them, a little too eager to push my findings into a neat, pre-approved box." My gut twisted. I left the conversation hanging, the unspoken question of his motives thick in the air. My priority was the polymer, the tiny, almost invisible speck that had defied classification. I needed to know what it was, and more importantly, where it came from. My determination hardened with every step I took towards the analytical instruments. Back in the hushed precision of the FBI Forensic Science Division examination suite, the air hummed with the low thrum of diagnostic machinery. Fluorescent lights cast a cool, even glow across the polished stainless steel countertops and the array of spectrometers, chromatographs, and electron microscopes. The suite was my sanctuary, a place where facts, however minute, could be coaxed into revealing their secrets. I slipped on a pair of nitrile gloves, the material stretching taut over my knuckles, and leaned over the scanning electron microscope. The polymer fragment, no bigger than a grain of sand, was mounted on a tiny carbon stub. I spent the better part of the afternoon lost in the magnified world of molecular structures. The polymer was complex, layered, exhibiting properties I hadn't encountered in any standard database. It resisted common solvents, showed an unusual thermal stability, and its surface morphology suggested a unique manufacturing process. This wasn't off-the-shelf material. This was custom and expensive. My focus was absolute, the outside world fading into a distant hum. I finally pulled away from the eyepiece, my eyes gritty, a dull ache starting behind my temples. The preliminary analysis pointed to a highly specialized composite, possibly used in advanced aerospace or medical applications, but with a unique crystalline structure that set it apart. It was a signature, a fingerprint, if I could just decipher it. I saved the spectral data, my mind already racing through potential manufacturers, niche research facilities, and the rare patents that might describe something similar. Leaving the suite, the sterile quiet of the FBI building felt almost too calm. The evening light outside had softened, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. I walked towards my car, my thoughts still consumed by Thorne's lab, by the polymer, by the nagging sense that something significant was being hidden. I was crossing the intersection a few blocks from the building when it happened. I had the light, the pedestrian signal, a bright, unwavering white. Mid-stride, a black sedan, an older model, its windows tinted opaque, shot out from the cross street. It wasn't speeding, not overtly, but its trajectory was undeniable, straight for me. My breath hitched. Time seemed to stretch, the screech of tires and the blare of a horn from an oncoming driver echoing in the sudden, terrifying silence of my mind. I reacted instinctively, a sharp, violent pivot, throwing my weight backwards, stumbling onto the curb. The sedan swerved at the last possible second, missing me by inches, its dark form a blur as it peeled around the corner and vanished, not even a brake light to acknowledge its near miss. My pulse hammered a frantic drum against my ribs. I stood there, panting, my hands clenched into fists, the scent of hot rubber stinging my nostrils. An accident. The driver hadn't even hesitated, hadn't slowed, hadn't looked back. No, that wasn't an accident. That was deliberate. A message. They knew I was getting close. I drove home, the incident replaying in a relentless loop. My apartment, usually a refuge, felt exposed. The small, cluttered workspace I kept in the corner of my living room, filled with personal notes and preliminary sketches related to my cases, suddenly seemed vulnerable. I checked the lock on my door twice, then a third time. I made myself a cup of strong coffee, the steam warming my face, but the unease persisted. I walked over to my desk, intending to review some older files to distract myself. That's when I saw it. Nothing was missing, no drawer was ajar, but my pen cup, usually a chaotic jumble of writing instruments, was too neat. The pens were all aligned, nibs pointing in the same direction, a subtle, almost imperceptible order where there had always been disarray. And the small, framed photo of my niece, usually angled slightly towards my chair, was now perfectly straight. Someone had been in my apartment. Someone had been in my workspace. My hand trembled as I picked up the photo, my mind racing. Not a break-in for theft. This was a statement. A warning, just like the car. They weren't just impeding the investigation, they were telling me they could reach me anywhere. The quiet menace of it was far more unsettling than any overt threat. The sharp ring of my phone made me jump. It was Maya. His voice, usually calm and composed, was thin, laced with a barely suppressed tremor. "Reid, I need to talk to you. Can you meet me, somewhere private?" "I'm on my way," I answered, my voice low, already grabbing my keys. The near miss. The subtle breach of my apartment, it all clicked into place. This wasn't just about Thorne anymore. This was about me. I met Meyer at a quiet, out-of-the-way coffee shop, its interior warm with soft lighting and the aroma of roasted beans. She sat hunched over a half-empty mug, her eyes darting nervously towards the door. After Thorne, after everything, I kept thinking about it. Things I saw, things that didn't make sense. She wrung her hands, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her mug. A few weeks before the accident, I started noticing it, late at night. I'd sometimes work late or forget something and have to go back, and I saw him. Him, I prompted, my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. A man. He wasn't one of the regular security detail, and he certainly wasn't Thorne or any of the approved researchers. He was using Thorne's keycard, I think, or one like it. He'd slip into the lab, usually after midnight, and stay for hours. I only ever saw him from a distance, mostly from the parking lot or catching a glimpse through the perimeter fence as I was leaving. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. I never saw his face, never got a good look, but he was there more than once, and he shouldn't have been. My mind flashed back to the high-security environment, the meticulous controls. Maya's words painted a starkly different picture. An unknown individual accessing Thorne's lab after hours with what sounded like an authorized keycard. It was a gaping hole in the security narrative, a direct contradiction to the official story of the lab's impenetrable nature. "Why didn't I say anything sooner, Maya?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. Her eyes, wide and frightened, met mine. I thought it was just me. Or that maybe Thorne had a silent partner he hadn't told anyone about. He was so secretive sometimes. But then, after he died and they called it an accident, it just kept nagging at me. And then I started getting these anonymous calls, nothing explicit but enough to make me feel watched. I thought I was going crazy, but now, with what I read doing Reid, I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. My jaw tightened. The pieces were starting to connect. The highly specialized polymer, the deliberate near miss, the subtle violation of my home, and now Maya's terrified confession of an unknown man with privileged access to Thorne's lab. This wasn't just a murder, it was a conspiracy, and I was directly in its crosshairs. The threat was real, and it was escalating. I was diving headfirst into something far more dangerous than a simple murder investigation. The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. An unknown man, privileged access, a targeted attack on my own home. This wasn't just about Thorne anymore. It was personal, and it was escalating. I pushed the thought aside, or at least tried to. There was only one place to go with information like this, one place where raw data could be coerced into telling the truth. The FBI Forensic Science Division examination suite. The suite hummed with a low, constant thrum, a chorus of servers, ventilation systems, and specialized equipment. Fluorescent lights cast a stark, unwavering glow on the pristine white surfaces and the multitude of monitors. I felt a familiar surge of focused energy as I settled into my workstation, the air cool against my skin. The suite was my sanctuary, a place where the noise of the outside world faded, replaced by the intricate puzzle of data. On the main display, a schematic of Thorne's lab rotated slowly, a detailed blueprint of its bespoke systems, each conduit and sensor meticulously mapped. The lead digital forensic specialist, a woman with quick, precise movements and eyes that rarely left him screens, had already loaded the encrypted data from Thorne's lab. "Everything looks clean, Reid," he stated without turning, his fingers dancing across a keyboard. "No external breaches, no malware signatures. If there was a remote trigger, it came through authenticated channels, or it was a local command set to delay." I nodded, already expecting as much. A killer this sophisticated wouldn't leave a digital breadcrumb trail of obvious hacks. Pull up the environmental controls for the last 72 hours leading to the incident. Focus on atmospheric composition, temperature and pressure differentials. Cross-reference with energy consumption logs for all major equipment. Hours blurred into a relentless cycle of scrolling, cross-referencing, and zooming in on infinitesimal data points. My eyes burned, but the determination in my gut kept me anchored. The initial readings were bland, almost perfectly normal. A gradual temperature increase typical for a lab running high-intensity experiments. Atmospheric stability within expected parameters. Nothing screamed sabotage, but I wasn't looking for screams. I was listening for whispers, and then I found it. A minuscule deviation. Exactly 47 minutes before the primary explosion, a barely perceptible spike in the inert gas release manifold. Just a fraction of a second, not enough to trigger an alarm, but enough to register in the deep logs. It was immediately followed by a slight, almost imperceptible dip in oxygen concentration, lasting less than a minute before the system corrected itself. A ghost in the machine, easily dismissed as a sensor glitch or a calibration test, but I knew better. There, I pointed, my finger hovering over the anomaly on the screen. "See that? A micro-burst of nitrogen, not enough to cause harm, but enough to prime the environment." The digital specialist leaned in, him brow furrowed. "It's within the margin of error, Reid, could be anything." "It's not anything," I countered, my voice low but firm. "It's a setup. Now correlate that with the power consumption of Thorne's primary bioreactor unit. Specifically, look for any unscheduled power fluctuations, however brief, in the 5 minutes after that nitrogen release, but before the main catastrophic overload." The specialist worked, her fingers flying. A moment later, a new graph appeared. There it was. A tiny, almost insignificant surge, a micro-spike that lasted less than a tenth of a second, precisely 3 minutes after the inert gas anomaly. It was too small to trip any safety protocols, too fleeting to be noticed by anyone not looking for ghosts. My mind raced, connecting the digital dots with the physical evidence I'd seen in the lab. The unique burn patterns, the precise way the polymer residue had been distributed. He preconditioned the atmosphere, I murmured, more to myself than to the specialist. Reduced the oxygen fraction just enough to make Thorne's specific experimental reagents more volatile, more susceptible to a runaway reaction. Then, he introduced a tiny, controlled energy surge into the bioreactor. Not enough to cause an immediate explosion, but enough to destabilize Thorne's complex, sensitive process. A slow burn, a ticking time bomb initiated remotely, designed to look like a spontaneous critical failure. The specialist stared at the screen, then at me, her face pale. That's incredibly precise. It wouldn't trigger any alarms until the actual catastrophe. Exactly, I confirmed, a grim satisfaction settling over me. It was designed to look like Thorne pushed his research too far, but it wasn't a miscalculation. It was a perfectly orchestrated sequence, a multi-stage manipulation of the lab systems, triggered remotely to create a fatal event. The polymer wasn't just to contain the blast, it was to direct it, to ensure Thorne was at the epicenter, and to accelerate the decomposition of any specific evidence. The implications were stark. This wasn't just about access, it was about intimate knowledge. Knowledge of Thorne's exact research protocols, the precise chemical composition of his experimental materials, the specific tolerances of his bespoke equipment, and the intricate workings of the lab's environmental controls. This wasn't some random hitman. This was someone who lived and breathed Thorne's work, someone who knew the lab better than its own designer. The remote trigger. I responded, my voice barely above a whisper. It had to be an authorized access. An internal login, perhaps from a system outside the immediate lab, or a timed command executed days earlier. Someone with Thorne's credentials or with an equivalent level of privilege. My jaw tightened. The conspiracy was deeper than I'd imagined, and the killer was far more dangerous. They weren't just covering tracks. They were writing a new narrative, and they nearly got away with it. The fluorescent lights of the FBI Forensic Science Division examination sweet hummed with a sterile efficiency that usually soothed me. But today, it only amplified the relentless thrum of my own thoughts. I sat before a bank of high-resolution monitors, Thorne's digital life splayed across them in a labyrinth of files and data logs. The air, conditioned to a precise temperature, felt heavy with the weight of unanswered questions. The previous day's findings still gnawed at me. The killer hadn't just gained access. They'd possessed an almost preternatural understanding of Thorne's lab, his experiments, even the nuances of his bespoke equipment. It wasn't merely about slipping past security. It was about orchestrating a catastrophe that mimicked a tragic miscalculation, a fatal accident. But the why of such an elaborate charade kept circling back to the same point. It was too much effort for simple theft. If someone wanted Thorne's research, they could have simply downloaded it, perhaps even kidnapped him for a forced transfer of knowledge. The destruction of the lab, the complete annihilation of Thorne himself, it felt like overkill for a data heist. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but my gaze was distant, fixed on the holographic projection of the lab's layout. Every detail, from the pressure valves to the ventilation shafts, was painstakingly rendered. The burn patterns, the specific residue they painted a picture of deliberate, precise engineering, not a random explosion. A killer with such intimate knowledge wouldn't just be after Thorne's work. They'd be after something more profound. I leaned back in my chair, the plastic creaking faintly. What if the goal wasn't to take the research, but to stop it? To prevent its completion or perhaps its public release? The thought settled in my gut with a cold, hard certainty. This wasn't about acquiring Thorne's groundbreaking discoveries. It was about burying them. Someone wanted Thorne and his work silenced permanently. If that was the case, then Thorne himself must have known something, or was on the verge of discovering something that someone found deeply threatening. I needed to find his true motivations, his fears, his final intentions. And the most likely place for such a confession would be his personal logs, the ones he might have kept separate from the official, shareable research data. I turned back to the monitors, my focus sharpening. I started digging deeper into the encrypted sections of Thorne's server, bypassing the public-facing project files. The official research logs were meticulous, detailed, but devoid of personal introspection. They read like scientific papers, sterile and objective. I wasn't looking for data. I was looking for a conscience. I navigated through layers of firewalls and obscure file names, my fingers flying across the keys. Most of Thorne's personal files were mundane. Utility bills, old family photos, a few obscure scientific journals he subscribed to. But then I hit a directory labeled Ethos Project X Inc. The ENC extension was a clear indicator. This wasn't just a protected folder, it was heavily encrypted. And the name, Ethos, suggested a moral or philosophical concern. A surge of adrenaline went through me. This was it. This felt like the hidden chamber I'd been searching for. The encryption was sophisticated, far beyond a simple password. It was layered, designed to resist casual breaches. Thorne clearly didn't want this found easily. I initiated a decryption protocol, feeding the file into a specialized forensic analysis program. The progress bar crawled, percentages ticking up agonizingly slowly. The suite, usually a symphony of quiet hums and clicks, seemed to hold its breath with me. I watched the progress bar inch towards completion, my gaze fixed, unblinking. Finally, after what felt like an hour, a notification flashed, decryption complete. A new window opened, displaying a series of dated entries, a digital diary of sorts. I scrolled to the most recent entries, dated just days before Thorne's death. His prose was stark, urgent, devoid of scientific jargon. August 14th. The progress on Project Chimera is terrifying. My own work intended for healing, for restoration, has been twisted. OmniCorp's clandestine funding of Project Chimera is no longer a secret to me. They're not just interested in the regenerative properties. They've weaponized the very principles I discovered. A biological agent designed for targeted incapacitation, disguised as a therapeutic. The implications are monstrous. My breath hitched. OmniCorp. I knew the name, a sprawling conglomerate with vast interests in biotech and pharmaceuticals. They were one of Thorne's primary funding sources publicly for his regenerative research, but Project Chimera, a biological agent. I scrolled down further, my eyes devouring the text. August 16th. My conscience will not allow this. They believe I'm oblivious, that my focus on my own research blinds me to their true intentions, but I've seen enough. I've cross-referenced their financial transactions, their shell companies. The funding funneling into the Chimera project, hidden under layers of plausible deniability, is undeniable. I cannot stand by and watch my life's work be perverted into a tool for control, for harm. August 18th. I've compiled the evidence. It's airtight. I intend to go public. To expose OmniCorp, to reveal the true nature of Project Chimera and how they've corrupted my discoveries. The world needs to know what they are building, what they intend to unleash. I have scheduled a meeting with a journalist I trust implicitly. Tomorrow I will send the files. The truth will come out. The date was August 18th. Thorne had died on August 19th. The pieces slammed into place with a sickening thud. This wasn't a lab accident, not a suicide, and not just a theft. Thorne wasn't killed for his research. He was killed to prevent him from exposing OmniCorp. The killer hadn't just understood Thorne's lab, they had understood Thorne's moral compass, his breaking point, and the exact moment he became a threat. The intricate, destructive method wasn't just to hide the murder. It was to obliterate the messenger and the message, to make it look like his own work had consumed him. This wasn't just a murder case anymore. It was a race against a powerful, ruthless corporation. And I was holding the smoking gun, or rather, the encrypted diary of its victim. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. The glow of the multiple monitors in the FBI Forensic Science Division examination suite cast a cool, almost surgical light across my face. It was late, but the quiet hum of the servers and the rhythmic tap of my fingers on the keyboard were the only sounds in the vast, sterile space. Coffee, black and bitter, was my constant companion, a silent testament to the hours I'd been poring over data, trying to make sense of the tangled web Thorne had left behind. After the revelation about the August 18th date, the entire case had shifted. It wasn't about theft anymore, or a simple cover-up. It was about silencing someone who knew too much, someone who was about to blow the whistle on OmniCorp. My task now was to find the hand that pulled the trigger, or, more accurately, the hand that initiated the catastrophic sequence in Thorne's lab. I had the lab's digital access logs spread across one screen, a sprawling timeline of every entry and exit, every system interaction. On another, I had OmniCorp's extensive employee database, cross-referenced with project assignments and security clearances. A third monitor displayed detailed schematics of Thorne's proprietary equipment, alongside the forensic analysis of the sabotage itself. It was a dizzying amount of information, but somewhere within it, I knew the answer lay hidden. My initial filter was simple: who had the highest level of access to Thorne's lab around the time of the incident? The list was short, as expected for such a high-security facility. Thorne himself, a couple of senior researchers, and the OmniCorp liaison. I started with those names, pulling up their profiles, scrutinizing their educational backgrounds, their work histories, their personal details. I wasn't just looking for opportunity. I was looking for the specific ability to orchestrate such a precise, complex act of sabotage. The killer hadn't just understood Thorne's work. They had understood how to weaponize it, how to make a system designed for precision self-destruct in a way that mimicked an accident. I eliminated the senior researchers fairly quickly. Their expertise, while high, was specialized within their own fields, not broad enough to encompass the intricate, multidisciplinary nature of Thorne's final project and the specific vulnerabilities exploited. The method of sabotage, as my team had painstakingly reconstructed, required a unique blend of bioengineering knowledge, advanced programming skills, and a chilling understanding of thermal dynamics and pressure systems. It was a signature if I could only read it. Then I focused on the OmniCorp liaison. His name was David Thorne, no relation to Aris. I pulled up his profile. My eyes scanned his education, a master's in bioengineering, a doctorate in computational physics. Interesting, I thought, a shiver running down my spine despite the cool air conditioning. That was a potent combination, far more encompassing than the others. It fit the technical demands of the sabotage perfectly. I dug deeper, cross-referencing his name with various public and private databases. OmniCorp's internal records were meticulous, almost aggressively so. His career trajectory was impressive, a swift climb through various R&D departments, marked by rapid promotions and high-stakes project leadership. But then I hit a snag, or rather a deliberately smoothed-over patch. There was a gap, a 2-year period early in his career that was vaguely attributed to special projects abroad. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Special projects in corporate speak could mean anything from an overseas merger to a covert intelligence operation. My gut tightened. I started digging into that 2-year window, cross-referencing it with known international incidents involving corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, and even government black ops. It was a long shot, but I had a feeling. What I found made the air in the suite feel suddenly heavy, thick with implications. David Thorne's name, or at least an alias closely linked to his unique biographical markers, appeared in a declassified report from a decade ago. It was a footnote in a larger investigation into the theft of advanced semiconductor designs from a European tech firm. The report mentioned a consultant with a background in strategic intelligence gathering who had been implicated but never formally charged due to lack of direct evidence and diplomatic pressure. The consultant had a known association with a private security firm notorious for its black ops division, a firm that specialized in corporate counterintelligence and sometimes corporate espionage. My eyes widened. A bioengineer and computational physicist with a background in covert operations. That wasn't just a coincidence. It was a terrifyingly precise skill set for the kind of murder I was investigating. The meticulous planning, the sophisticated execution, the ability to leave behind a scene that screamed accident while being anything but. It all clicked into place with a chilling finality. I remembered the microscopic residue on Aris Thorne's lab coat, the unusual burn pattern on the console. Details that, at the time, had seemed like anomalies, now made perfect sense within the context of a highly trained individual executing a deliberate, complex act of sabotage. Someone who knew how to manipulate not just the equipment, but the perception of the event itself. David Thorne, the OmniCorp liaison, the inside man. He hadn't just understood Aris Thorne's work. He had understood how to dismantle it, how to turn it into a weapon, and how to make Aris Thorne disappear without a trace of human intervention. And he had a motive. If Aris Thorne was about to expose OmniCorp, David Thorne, as their liaison and a man with a past that could easily unravel, would have been directly implicated. He would have had everything to lose. I leaned back in my chair, the screen reflecting my grim expression. The pieces had slammed into place, but this wasn't the end of the puzzle. This was just the beginning of a far more dangerous game. My fingers still remembered the phantom click of the keyboard from last night, the way I'd pieced together the fragments of OmniCorp's special projects with that 2-year window. It wasn't just corporate espionage. It was something far more insidious, something that had driven Aris Thorne to the brink. Now I just needed to prove it and flush out the killer. I stood in the heart of the FBI Forensic Science Division examination suite, the hum of the ventilation system a low thrum against the sterile quiet. My workstation, usually a controlled chaos of evidence bags and analysis printouts, was meticulously arranged. A single, unmarked folder lay on the corner of my desk, its contents a carefully constructed lie designed to draw a viper from its hole. Inside, I'd mocked up a preliminary report detailing a breakthrough in Aris Thorne's research. Not the real breakthrough, not the one Aris was killed for, but a fabricated one concerning the trace polymer. I'd written that I'd not only identified the polymer's unique molecular structure, but had also, through a series of simulated reactions, discovered its intended interaction with a specific bioagent. I implied that Aris had been on the verge of publishing a warning about this interaction, a warning that would expose the true, unethical purpose of the polymer within Omnicorp's clandestine projects. The report was marked Confidential Preliminary Findings for Review by Dr. Reid only. I knew the brother, Aris's own flesh and blood, had connections within Omnicorp. I knew he was desperate, and I knew he'd be watching, waiting for any sign of my progress. This report, left on my desk, just visible enough through the glass partition of my office door, was a lure. It suggested I was about to blow the lid off everything, and that Aris's work was still a threat, even in death. I walked out of my office, making sure to leave the door just ajar, the folder strategically placed. I grabbed a coffee from the break room, chatting loudly with a colleague about a completely unrelated, mundane case. My eyes, however, kept drifting back to the hallway to the subtle reflections in the polished floor that might betray a shadow. An hour later, I was back at my desk, pretending to review old case files. The folder was still there, untouched. My jaw tightened. Had I miscalculated? There was the brother more cautious than I thought. Then, a flicker. A security guard, usually a fixture at the main entrance, was called away for a minor incident in another wing. A few minutes later, I heard the faint click of a door closing further down the hall. Not my office, but the empty lab next to it, often used for temporary storage. My pulse quickened, a steady drum against my ribs. I waited. 5 agonizing minutes crawled by, then a barely audible creak from my own office. My hand instinctively went to the small, cold grip of the sidearm holstered beneath my jacket. I stood slowly, deliberately, and walked towards the door. The brother was inside. His back was to me, hunched over my desk, his fingers fumbling with the mock report. He hadn't even heard me approach. He spun around, eyes wide, a gasp catching in his throat. The folder slipped from his grasp, scattering the fabricated pages across the floor. What are you doing here? I thought I saw a draft. He stammered, his gaze darting around the room, searching for an escape. I stepped fully into the doorway, blocking his only exit. A draft, in a sealed suite. Funny, I didn't feel one. My eyes flicked to his hand. A small clear vial, no bigger than my thumb, was clutched tightly. It contained a viscous, clear liquid. And what's that then? Your own brand of air freshener. His hand trembled, the vial shaking. It's nothing, just a solvent. A solvent that could wipe data from a drive, perhaps, or neutralize a polymer sample. I walked to my desk, picking up one of the scattered pages. This report, you understood its significance, didn't you? The part about the polymer and the bioagent, that Aris was about to expose Omnicorp's little bioweapon project. He flinched at the words, his face paling further. I don't know what you're talking about, don't you? I reached into a drawer and pulled out a series of magnified photographs. I laid them on the desk, right next to the Fallen report. This, for instance, a microscopic trace of a unique polymer found on the ventilation grate in Aris's lab, and this, I slid another photo across, the exact same polymer recovered from the residue on your shoes after your visit to my apartment, the one where my gas line miraculously developed a leak. His eyes widened, fixed on the images. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. That's impossible, is it? I pushed another photo forward, this one showing a minute burn pattern on a piece of fabric. And this, the precise burn signature left by the polymer when it reacts with a specific accelerant. He was found on Aris's lab coat, a pattern that perfectly matches the one on the fabric of the accident scene in my kitchen. You were sloppy, my friend, desperate. You used the same method, the same material, because it was what you knew, what you had on hand. He stared at the photographs, then at the vial in his hand, then back at me. The bravado, the feigned innocence crumbled. Their special projects division, Aris, he found out. He discovered the true application of the polymer, what they were really developing, a bioweapon, my own brother. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. They threatened me, my family. They said if Aris went public, they'd make sure we all disappeared. They promised me protection, a future, if I just neutralized the threat. They gave me the access codes, the schematics, the polymer. They knew Aris's routine, his blind spots. They made it look like an accident. He buried his face in his hands, his body racked by a dry, guttural sob. He was going to ruin everything, and then I started digging. I had to stop, I couldn't let it all come out. The weight of his confession hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket of betrayal and corporate greed. The hum of the FBI Forensic Science Division examination suite seemed to grow louder, the sterile environment now tainted by the raw, ugly truth of what human ambition could drive a person to do. Aris Thorne wasn't a victim of a tragic accident or suicide. He was a casualty of a war he never wanted to fight, killed by the very people he sought to protect, and by the brother he trusted. The pieces finally clicked into place, forming a grim, complete picture. The truth, as always, was far more brutal than any theory.